Welcome back to the Video Game Podcast. My name is Ben, and with me, as always, is Wes. How are you doing, Wes?
I'm doing great, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing great. Really good. I'll talk about why I'm feeling good later, but why don't you start, Wes? What have you been playing?
It's kind of continuing on the same thing as last week. There's so much stuff that you can do in Breath of the Wild that as long as I'm still in the mood for a Zelda game, I think I'm pretty much just going to be chipping away at that. It's funny seeing the little differences between how I play it and how my brother plays it. He's very on the main quests, and I've been like picking up rocks to see if there's secrets under them for the past like 12 hours.
Yep.
And the problem is there's like secrets under half those rocks.
Oh, no.
Doesn't encourage me to stop doing it. I'm still picking them up and throwing them places.
Is it like Mario Odyssey where you'll try to go like someplace like way off the beaten track and like there's something there? It's like they thought about this.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it. Like, I mean, I haven't got the whole map yet, so I don't know if like some of the locations I found are gonna make sense and be part of quests later in the game. But I was just like climbing up these mountains that look like, oh, why would anyone climb up them? They're too tall. And there was like a mini boss that gave me a bunch of stuff up there.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, well, hell yeah, now I have to explore everything and I'm never going to get anything done.
Yep.
Which is the trap of those open world games. It's finding all that random stuff that rewards you from just aimlessly exploring for 2 hours.
Yep.
But it's been good. I'm loving it. I mean, after this, I'm probably going to go and play some more of it.
Nice.
So I already know the secret here, but what's got you so excited? What have you been playing recently?
Well, I bought a Switch as well. And
Hell yeah.
I had to because Mario Maker 2 came out.
Right, you didn't have a
Friday.
choice.
Yeah, I really didn't. It's like I own a Wii U, and that's the only Mario Maker 1 is the only game I own for Wii U. So you can tell I'm a pretty big Mario fan. And I've basically been playing it since it came out nonstop. I haven't done anything else. Which on one hand I like because it meant that, you know, I spent like $300 on something I'm actually using. And then on the other hand, I'm like, I still have to do like real work. So I didn't do any real work yet. But it's great.
Good. I mean, you gotta, while you're super excited about that new console and game, capitalize on that like wave of excitement.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like the first Mario Maker, I didn't buy it until like almost a full year after it was released. Mm-hmm. And so by the time I played it, the like number of users had died down a bit. Everybody kind of knew what was going on. And I kind of missed that, you know, discovery phase where everybody was finding stuff out for the first time and making levels around it. So for Mario Maker 2, I really wanted to be there on day one, you know, discovering stuff alongside everybody else. And yeah, it's really cool. There's some things I don't like about it. They took away a couple interactions, and I don't know if you can call them like glitches, but like the hardest trick in Super Mario Maker 1 was what's called the midair, where you're just jumping and you're holding a shell and you drop the shell and then jump off of the shell while you're in the air. And they took that away. You can't do it anymore. So stuff like that. I know, stuff like that. I was like, is that really necessary? But
yeah,
the amount of stuff that they added is just incredible. Like almost doubled the amount of items and backgrounds and themes and stuff. So
that's awesome. Well, yeah. And you know that with a community as active as that has, especially now, people are going to find new ways to quote unquote break it in fun ways. Yeah. So I'm sure there'll be something similar difficulty and hopefully usefulness as that. But
yeah, it's just like for a couple of the levels I had like ideas of, oh, well, this worked in the last game, now I can combine it with some other thing and make some cool level out of it. And it's like, oh, the last thing doesn't exist anymore. There's like a couple of those situations, but I'll find other cool stuff. I'm not too worried about it. Nice. And I've already made 3 levels, and I thought ahead and named my like Switch character or whatever Historian, so because I knew I'd be talking about it. But yeah, so far perfect. I made 3 levels and named them each after a Marvel villain, which is okay. So I got the first one, I just made a jungle level because jungle's brand new, and I called it Kraven the Hunter, which is like a Spider-Man villain. Oh
yeah, I remember him from the Xbox Spider-Man games.
Oh yeah. And then I didn't know I was doing like Marvel when I made it, but at the end I was like, that's a good name. But then after that, I thought about Marvel in particular, and I made one called Rhino, and I'm really proud of that one because it involves, like, if you have a bomb and it explodes near a certain wall, it'll like destroy the wall.
Okay.
Normally you like throw the bomb over there, wait for it to blow up, and then go through. But I made a level all based around you've got like a power up, so you won't die if you take damage. And then you have to like run through the wall right before the bomb explodes so that you're like running through these walls as the bomb is exploding. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, and it definitely reminds you of Rhino just running through every brick wall
I
in
know.
his way trying to get the Spider-Man.
I was pretty happy about that. And then the newest one I made is called Reptile, and it's just in like a sewer theme.
Nice.
No, not
Is that
Reptile.
I was going to say, what the heck's his name? I can't even remember.
I'm thinking
the
of
lizard scientist, right?
Yeah, Abomination is his name.
Oh, okay. Well, and then there's another one that's like the...
Yeah, it's Killer
Who
Croc, I
knows?
think.
Yeah.
That you're thinking of. But yeah,
Reptile's the Mortal Kombat guy, right?
Yeah. Not that guy. No, it's I named it Abomination.
There
which
you
is
go.
like a Hulk villain.
Ah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, sweet. You've been spending most of your time making levels or playing other people's?
Mostly making. I kind of wanted to get it in real fast while there's a lot of people playing. That was my idea. But Mario Maker 2 shares your levels differently than Mario Maker 1 did, where Mario Maker 1, it would just throw your level at a random person, and if they liked it, it would throw it at some more people.
Okay.
But on this one, it doesn't throw random levels at anybody anymore. It's more like designed where if you're playing the game normally through the endless mode, you only get levels that are good, that other people have said they're good. So for your level to get a first time play, it has to go through like, there's a section called new levels, and it has to be in there first. But that like new level queue is 100,000 levels deep or something at this point.
Okay, yeah. And it does not until something gets like promoted to a good level or whatever does it leave that queue.
Yeah,
Weird.
which
Okay.
is very weird, and I'm a little worried about it because I made my level on the day that Mario Maker 2 came out, and still no one's played it because in the queue they were only at like levels that were released at like noon that day, and it's like 4 days later.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of thinking if more people make levels than play them, will it just exponentially get worse?
Yeah. That's an interesting problem. Because is the new level queue only at the beginning, like quote unquote, of the game? Like, do you just move past that at some point?
It's like a whole different game mode, and it's not the popular
okay.
one.
Right, because you want to play good levels.
Yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen with that yet, but I'm sure once my level comes up in the queue, it'll get its fair chance to shine,
Right,
So-
yeah. People will like it and it'll move up. But
yeah, and I made my 3 levels within the first 2 days of Mario Maker coming out, so I'm sure they will get some plays, but I was like, this is a little concerning.
yeah, I feel like you're probably not the only one in the community concerned about that. So it'd be nice if they added back some sort of random discovery mode.
Yeah, I've been checking Reddit pretty frequently. It seems weird because like all the streamers and stuff, they're just like in heaven because like they don't have to play any bad levels anymore. They can.
Right.
There's so many new mechanics and stuff, but part of me feels like you have to be critical at the same time, and I definitely think there's things to be critical about. So I don't know. Maybe that's just like the cynic in me, but
Yeah, well, I don't know. I can see where you're coming at it. It's kind of like the game might get stale if everyone's voting the same games or the same maps or whatever. But yeah,
I mean, if a level is good and it's being shown to a lot of people, it's like more likely to get more upvotes and be shown to more people, So I feel like it's hard to jump in there, which is why I'm glad I got it day one, because last time I would have been, maybe no one would ever have played it if I made a level a year from now. I don't know.
A year late, yeah.
Obviously, you can actually send the code to like a friend in real life and they can be the first to upvote it, and then it'll get thrown in that system. So,
well, that's good.
Yeah.
At least there's an out in that sense.
Yeah, for like streamers and stuff, they just post their level code to their viewers and it'll get upvotes. So,
right.
Yeah, but for someone who just bought a Switch console and doesn't have any Switch friends yet, or at least no one with Mario Maker 2.
Right. Sorry, probably not going to get that one, but
Yeah, hey, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's a little concerning, but I'm having tons of fun. Just making
Nice.
the levels are fun. Playing the levels, obviously, you're playing way better levels on average, so that's great. There's a story mode. I love that.
Nice.
Yeah, before you could play Super Mario 1, 3, Super Mario World, and New Super Mario Brothers, and now they added Super Mario 3D Land, which I've never heard about before. I think it's like a 3DS game.
Okay, interesting.
It's like Cat Mario and Cat Bowser are like, I don't know why everything's cat based, but everybody has like different abilities from normal, and the physics engine's like completely different, and it's actually like really cool. So
Nice.
I've been loving it. Yeah, I can't stop playing, even though I need.
Well, yeah, and as we mentioned before we started recording, it could be pretty easy for us to talk about Mario Maker this whole episode.
I know I want to, but we had to move on.
Yeah, so unless you have any other points, do you want to move on to our talking point for the day?
I'm sure I will say other points next week.
Sounds good.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about, so the main topic or special topic this week is I wanted to update people on some of the sources that I've been using to create this timeline, because, you know, I want to be kind of transparent in how I'm doing things, and my research process has changed a lot since I think the last time I talked about it was like episode 3 or something.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
And at that time, we were going through each year. Basically, it was like 1 or 2 games a year, right? And a lot of the early history sources I was using only went up to like 1970. So for the mid 70s, I've had to kind of redo a lot of my process, which made 1973 in particular really took a long time. But now that I've kind of figured it out, it's been going a lot faster. So yeah, let me quickly talk about it. First, I kind of do it year by year, right? And whenever I start a new year, I always go to, on YouTube, there's a channel named The Gaming Archives. And they make little year by year compilation videos of all the games they think were released that year. And I'd say probably 75% of the games on our list are right from like that video. It's all the big ones and even a lot of the small ones.
Oh, good.
So I kind of just watch their video. I'll write down every single game, and they don't put it in order or anything. It's just like alphabetically, but at least I've got the names. I've got a lot of the time the publisher. So it's a good place I always start at. The other main database that I use to find new games is from www.arcade-museum.com. And that one is like an arcade machine database. So you can sort by year, and they just have like hundreds and hundreds of arcade machine games year by year. So a lot of them I already kind of know from the YouTube video, but I'll find a lot of extra stuff, a lot of really unknown, or like arcademuseum.com is like tied with flyers.arcademuseum.com. So a lot of the flyer only games I find through that website. And I don't know why there's so many flyers, but like a lot of the games, there's just a flyer and that's all the information we have. And this website doesn't just have a random picture of a flyer. It's like, this is the game. This is when it was supposed to be released. This is what the publisher was. Like, you know, it organizes things in a database. That's really nice.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so you don't have to go digging so much for it.
Yeah, so that's like a great one. At that point, I'll do like a Google search just to try to find any games I left out. Usually computer games, I'm always like, since the Arcade Museum database is only arcade machine games, anything that's a computer game that's not in the YouTube video, I'm kind of worried I'd miss them. So I do like extra checks for computer games. I'll like try to do more Google searches and Wikipedia searches and anything I can find to find computer games, but that part always takes me a little bit longer. I like to use, I know we already mentioned it, but Hippolyto Picardo has like a Excel spreadsheet of all the games he's found, and usually our list is like way longer than his, but he does a good job of keeping track of those computer games that I kind of miss sometimes, so I always check with him. And then at that point, I probably will go to, there's another website called pong-story.com, and pongstory.com is like amazing for console research, especially on the early consoles. they have a lot of the pictures and information that I use when we talk about consoles. We're going to be talking about 3 that were released in 1974, and anything, future probably through 1980. I'm going to use that source as, the main source for a lot of our console games. So that's a great one to go to for the console research. And then at that point, I've got like all the games, all the computer games, console games, and it's time to start organizing, which is actually like the hardest part. I'll have this list of games and titles and publishers, but I don't really know when in the year they were released. So I usually start by typing the name into a wiki named Undumped Wiki, and the full address is mamedev.emulab.it, which I don't know what that stands for. I don't know if it's
no
I don't
idea.
know if IT is like Italy, but it's in English. I don't know. But if you go to any sort of wiki article, like the Mario Maker wiki or whatever, it's kind of like that. But I'll go there, type in a game, and it'll have links to all the other, tons of other websites and forums and pictures and YouTube videos of the game. It'll say whether the game is playable, according to them. It'll say the release date according to them, which usually I think their release dates are pretty on the spot. Sometimes they'll even say, I've seen the date for this game being January, March, and September, so they'll at least break it down that way, and I can make an informed guess from there.
That's good.
Yeah, and it's just I kind of view it as a hub of information on a game, and from that hub I can find the YouTube videos, the pictures, it'll have links to the arcademuseum.com database, so I can go back there really easy. So I kind of use a combination of that to put things in order in the timeline as best as I can, but it takes a while. I have to do that for every single game, even all the honorable mentions that we group up, because at the time I don't know what they are. So every single Pong clone, I'll look it up, and then I'll have to type in, on my own sheet, this is a Pong clone, so that we know this is this game, this is how it's played, this game looks really good, we should probably review it, this game is just Pong button color, So
right.
I'm looking for all those things at that point later, but those are the main sources I've been using. Just to go over them again real quick, arcade-museum.com is the great arcade machine database, and it's a sister site. Flyers.arcade-museum.com has all the flyers, and by the way, arcade-museum.com has links to the flyers per each game's page, so you don't even need to retype that. The Gaming Archive at YouTube is a good general overview. mamedev.emulab.it has the resource hub on each game, and pong-story.com for the early consoles. So yeah, those are kind of the main things. And just the arcade-museum.com, that website gives me the majority of games and its information for each episode, because the majority of games we're playing right now are arcade machine games. So
yeah, it's always coming out at the time.
Yeah. But you can see that, I'm not using as many specialized sources as I was before, just because all these games are now, there's an arcade machine website that has information on all of them, and it's not just a single website on NIM, a single website for Birdie in the Brain like it was before.
Right.
So also, I forgot to write this one down, but there's also a website called allincolor4a quarter.blogspot.com, otherwise known as the Golden Age Arcade Historian. And this is a historical blog that somebody's made, and they don't really go over individual video games at all, but stuff like the history of X company, if they have it on their website, it's a great resource. There also might be, I used their website for the first 10 arcade machine games, I think was a article they wrote, which was great for kind of putting in order which Pong clones were released first, and that's how I feel really confident saying the Allied Leisure Pong clone was the first one.
Right.
So stuff like that. if you can find a topic that they've written about on there, there's like so much information. So like the history of Allied Leisure is like 8 blog posts long or something. We've only done like the first 3 when we talked about it the other week. So yeah, I feel like that's pretty good. What do you think, Wes? Any questions you think anyone might have?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's for me not doing I'm kind of on the presentation side of it. I mean, of course, I know that you do a lot of work for this, but it's crazy to see how many things you use to piece it all together and make sure we're kind of presenting the most accurate compilation of all this information that we can.
Yeah.
So it's impressive. Good job, Ben. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was just hard, like, once we really moved into the arcade machine stuff, until I found those links, like MAME Dev, that one, and the Arcade Museum one, until I found those links, I was like really struggling for a while because I just couldn't find any info. And even the link of like pongstory.com, that one, which has all the console information, I didn't find that until like the very end of my research. I didn't even see it because on the Wikipedia page, it doesn't even list them. At least on the main Wikipedia page of like the first console generation.
Right.
So I didn't know anything about them, but we'll talk about them when we go over the 1974 consoles. But it's just nice to have, your main sources that you're going to be going back to kind of all laid out now. So I don't think the next couple of years are going to be that hard for me, honestly.
Right. And probably as, people are finally realizing, oh, maybe we should keep track of this stuff, and it's actually like an important industry, there's going to be more info and more everything kind of gathered in one place, especially when there's a company that's specifically doing a lot of games. Like, you're going to be able to find a lot on Atari because Atari was so important and popular.
Yeah, I found Atari's a good one because I found some other forum or blogger or something, they put Atari's entire video game history in a timeline, one right after the next, and I used their timeline to like double check dates and stuff. So, and I've like every time I find like a website with anything important, I just bookmark it. So I've got like 1,000 bookmarks, but I can get to anywhere I need to go really fast, which is the important thing.
Nice, yeah, and able to cross-reference once you're able to start finding multiple sources on a subject.
Yeah, I always, especially when I try to find dates, I'll cross-reference a lot. There's a lot of, I don't want to say there's misinformation, but this stuff is so old that there's still a fair amount of guesswork when it comes to the games. So a lot of people, especially if a game was released like between 2 years or something, like in December or January, it could 50-50 go either way. But for our purposes, that's like a really important distinction. So I try to cross-reference and have the best judgment I can when I'm researching this stuff. So I just wanted to update people on that in case they wanted to check it out for themselves. That's how I'm putting the list together. Obviously, there's a lot of, one-offs that I'll find, especially as I like Google each game name individually, which I'll do for when I'm finding dates. But at least you can get the bulk source of the information from those databases. Although none of those databases put these games in order, so we're the first ones doing that.
There's still work to be done, I guess, and hopefully that gets easier as we go along.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I feel like when we were first starting to look at maybe doing a podcast, I like looked at just NES games, I want to say, or maybe Famicom games, and they were only released month by month. They didn't have a day release, even like the 80s, or I forget when they came out, but
weird.
I want to say it was like the 80s, and I was like, wow.
Yeah, they're just like, who cares? Nobody needs to know when it came out.
Yeah. All right, I think with that, we are ready to get into it.
All right.
Catch you guys on the other side.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. And without any further ado, we're going to get right into our timeline. So the first one that we have today is a couple of honorable mentions, 3 different games that are in the style of Ramtech Hockey that we talked about last time, where it's the idea of multiple paddles and a limited size goal to shoot for, but still kind of Pong-ish. So we had mini hockey and table hockey by Sega, which one of the first times we've seen them. I haven't seen them in a little bit on here.
Mm-hmm.
TV Joker by Zachariah, and Pro Hockey by Computer Games Incorporated. And all of these were released in early 1974.
And I should mention Computer Games Incorporated, the worst company. Cannot Google that.
The hardest game to search for ever.
Yeah. And I think Zachariah was like a Brazilian company or something. So
okay, yeah.
Video game
and I don't think we'd seen
global.
that. Yeah, people are finally like, oh, okay, hey, this is a thing.
Yeah.
And then next up in our honorable mentions, we have Playtime by Midway, also in early 74. And this one was basically just a Magnavox Odyssey table tennis clone, but did have the nice addition of the score disappearing while the ball is actually in play.
And it had a score, which is nice.
Yeah, I didn't know how much I appreciated that until we played so many games that made you manually keep score.
Yeah.
And next up, we're actually going to get into the first game that I got to play, which is Star Trader. And this one I was super excited for. I'm a big space sim fan, as you could probably tell when I was talking about the Star Trek game in one of the previous episodes. This one was made by David Kaufman, and it was released in January of 1974. He made it with basic code, and the official sort of release is when the code was printed in the January release of the People's Computer Company newsletter. And this one would go on to later inspire the first Space Trader multiplayer game called Trade Wars. And this one likely gained its inspiration from the series of Isaac Asimov novels, Foundation. A lot of ideas that you see in space games all the way up to modern space games where there's these central core universe planets that are highly developed and technologically advanced. And then the further out you get, there's the more wild and untamed outskirt planets. And that's reflected in sort of how you trade in this game. And as an early entry into the genre of space trading kind of games and also a space simulator, it could have had influence on games like Freelancer, which is one of my personal favorites and part of the reason I'm so excited about this one. And the Elite series of games, Wing Commander, and possibly even EVE Online, with trading being such a huge part of that game. And for the gameplay of this, it's a text-based game. Starts by giving you just a brief story of what's happening in the universe, something along the lines of they've had space travel for 70 years and talking about the different classes of planets, like I mentioned. And the whole goal of it is just to travel between these planets. There's random events that happen along the way and trade different stuff to make money. And it's interesting because you can, based on how advanced a planet is, they may have banks, and you can actually deposit money in their banks so that I'm assuming you don't have it robbed from you by pirates.
Wow.
I had pirates attack me a couple times, but all it did was delay how long it took me to get to the next system.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not sure. Because the banks are a thing, though, I'm guessing there's got to be a way that you just lose all your money, or at least a decent chunk of it. And it's cool that even though this is a text one, it had sort of a rudimentary, like, not exactly ASCII characters, but like plus signs and everything that would show a map of the solar system that you're in, or the series of systems that you're in, and where you can travel and relatively how far away they are from each other.
Nice.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. It gave me it's would have been really hard to visualize the distance of all those planets without the actual map there. And the distance becomes important because it takes each sort of turn or game turn is a year in the time of the game. And how many turns you actually get trading depends on how much time you take going between each planet. So if you decided to go to a bunch of really close planets and only trade between them, you could have maybe 6 turns, depending on how close they are. But if you went to further ones, you might be able to make a more lucrative trade because you're trading a further distance, but you might only end up getting 2 turns going there and back.
Right.
So it's interesting that there was sort of this dynamic strategy there. The version I played was, I think, a simulated version of a later release of this. So there was multiplayer, and I was playing as both players. But as far as I could tell, the earliest version of this was single player. So it would probably just be strategy, might not play too much into it other than trying to beat your own personal score. And some of the other basics of the game, you start out with 25 cargo units. There's 6 different supplies you can trade: uranium software, not uranium software, uranium, software, heavy equipment, medicine, gems, and metals. You can haggle at each planet, so
Nice.
I think there's probably a set amount that they'll either reject based on how much demand they have, or accept it if they really need it, even though you're asking for a high price. So there's just a lot of fun little ways that you can make more money and decide where you're selling. Certain types of planets need software if they're underdeveloped, but also as the game goes on, if they've been getting more software through the game, they'll become a more developed system, and they won't need that anymore because they're already one of the higher developed systems now.
Cool.
So yeah, it was interesting, the sort of incremental progress that happens over the years and changes where you can trade, so you can't just auto click to the same trade route through the whole entire game.
Right.
And you actually have to think about it a little bit more.
Like, before you went to those underdeveloped nations, was there like any indication that they would need software, or was it just like trial and error at the beginning?
That's an important point. Thanks for bringing it up. At the beginning of the game and each year, there's a yearly report that shows you each planet, what class they are, 4 being like the most underdeveloped, and, or I keep saying planet and system interchangeably. I think technically they're all star systems, but you get the basic idea.
Mm-hmm.
But it shows whether it's underdeveloped or 4, and if it's class 1, that means it's the most highly developed. And then it'll also show you each of the different things you can buy and sell, and whether or not that planet is currently buying or selling it.
Oh, okay.
So you do know going into it, okay, this planet's probably going to need that. It's a little hard to keep track of because you also command 2 ships at a time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was having trouble saying, okay, I sent this person there because they're going to trade this commodity, and then this person there to do that. And I might need like a pen and paper or something if I was actually trying to really keep track of it and make money.
Mm-hmm.
But it is nice that there's multiple things on the go. You're not just waiting for this ship to get to this planet to come back. You're also can have a different trade route going at the same time. But yeah, so there's a decent bit of strategy in that. As I sort of alluded to, I love space sim games, so I'm biased in this. And I have a soft spot for the Space Trader game because I know that space trading in general becomes a gameplay element in like all of the modern space sims.
Yeah.
So for my actual ratings of the game, 1 out of 10 for graphics, just has text graphics. It is nice that it has that map, but the map is basically just the names of each system on the screen and not any sort of representation of a star system or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
0 out of 10 for sound because there isn't any sound. And gameplay, I gave it a 2 out of 10. Seems kind of low, but I think there's not all that much there. I really like the game because I know that it's going to be influencing all these games, but in all those games in the future, this is just sort of a gameplay element.
Right.
So I think there's a lot you can do with this, but after a while, you'd probably figure out, even with the randomized, like what each planet needs, you can kind of just always say that planet needs that, and that's how I'm going to make the most money, and there you go.
Right.
And also, as far as I could tell, I don't know if there's really any winning other than always trying to beat your own score. So it's without a multiplayer aspect in this version of it, I don't know if there'd be much compelling reason to keep going back and playing it over and over again.
Do you think if, like, later you said there's multiplayer comes out for it, do you think that would make it more interesting, or you think just all your friends would get bored of it, like, sooner or later too?
I think definitely you'd probably run out of scenarios that to keep it interesting eventually, but it would definitely keep you drawn into it longer, especially if your friends were really into it. One thing that I forgot to mention that does make it more interesting with multiple players is that the demand a planet has is set for the year. So if they only need 14 things of uranium, and both you and another person are heading towards a planet, but one person happens to get there first,
Mm-hmm.
and they sell 14 units of uranium, by the time you get there, you can't sell any.
Right.
Because they don't want it anymore.
The
So that
whole
also adds
planet's
another. Yeah, they only needed 14 chunks of uranium, and now they're set. But there's that adds an element of risk to it. and the random events probably have a little bit more weight, because if you happen to be delayed 3 weeks and the other person was only delayed 1, then you're screwed out of getting your sale from that trip.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, that's part of the reason I had gameplay as a 2 on there anyway, because depending on whether or not you like random events and the game not being a pure skill game, it's either more or less fun.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, for the relevance, I rated it pretty highly up there because it's, from what I could see, one of, if not the first, like, real space trader game. And it's kind of helping establish that genre. And as we've seen in tons of space games today, whether it be EVE Online or Star Citizen, if it ever releases.
It's out now, Wes. Just take it for what it is.
In a form. And I'm a huge Star Citizen fan, so I can't knock on it that much. But but the idea of economies, where in this game it was sort of determined or random economies, and in EVE and Star Citizen it's going to be player-driven economy. But that's still such a huge part of how the space sim genre is defined, because it wouldn't be anywhere near as fun for a lot of the people who play those games if it was just combat.
Right.
Although, of course, there are space sims that do that, and people love that too. But like Elite Dangerous, which is out, has sort of bits of all of that, and economy plays a huge part in, if you're not a bounty hunter, how you're able to get your ships and progress. Mm-hmm. So for me, especially because I love that genre so much, I felt like 7 out of 10 was pretty fair for the relevance.
Yeah.
And overall, I gave it a 3 out of 10. I really did like it, but keeping in mind the context of what other space sims are going to be like in the future, it does sort of seem like just a gameplay element, which is sort of a lot of the stuff we're playing now. It kind of starts small, like the whole game is this thing that will end up being a gameplay element in a larger game. Like, we're playing all these tennis games, and then they might end up just being a mini game in Mario Party or something like that.
Right.
But it's still incredibly important to developing those games that we're playing now.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had on it. It was really fun. I love space games, if you couldn't tell.
I can tell. And luckily, it seems like all the computer games that were released at this time are basically space games.
Yeah, it was just a bunch of space nerds making video games on the computer back then, and I kind of love it.
Yeah. When I gave it to you, I mentioned, like, I'm pretty sure this game is just like Mountain Blade, but without any combat. Is that like what it is? Like when you were playing it? Did it feel like that at all?
Yeah, because it's just a trading element.
Yeah.
So, and random events, which does kind of suck. It's like, oh, okay, I'm just late by 3 weeks for no reason. Was
it usually pirates for the random events?
There was one weird one where it was because there was a local holiday. I was 1 week late. Okay. And that's all it said. I don't know if that meant like there's a lot of space traffic or...
I mean, you're doing it like year by year, right? That's the turns?
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure the holidays come every year, right?
That's what I was wondering too, but they did have it as like this system that you're traveling to is having a holiday, so that's why you're delayed. And also your turn doesn't necessarily take a whole year.
Oh, okay.
So it's not exactly like that, but yeah, it's I mean, you're going to run into that a bunch, I think.
Right. All right, cool. Is that all you wanted to say about Star Trader?
Yeah. I feel like I said a lot about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a real fun game, and that pretty much wraps it up.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't know if we ever like really said like this is our first episode in 1974, so we are in the next year now. And Star Trader came out real early in January, and my next game also came out really early, which is Wipeout by Ramtech. So Wipeout came out in early 1974, and it's another Pong variant, you know, as they are.
As you do, yeah.
Yeah. This one's more closely related to like Elimination, which I played. Was that? That was in last episode, two episodes ago. So basically you've got, you know, your 4-player version where one person's on each edge of the screen. So left, right, top, bottom. But the main reason why I wanted to play Wipeout was there's a 2-player version where one person is top, bottom, and one person is left and right. And I thought, ooh, that sounds kind of interesting. And there was also an obstacle in the middle of the screen. It looks like a plus sign.
Okay.
But it kind of interacted weird. Like the ball could go through it, but it seemed like it would also like bounce off of it. I think like the ball would hit it and then change direction, and even if the direction was like straight through, it could do that.
Okay, so it's kind of just like, it doesn't really depend where it hits it. It sort of just goes a random direction after.
Yeah, I mean, it's like an obstacle, but not like a hard wall, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So it had that as well, but I wanted to play it for mainly the two-person sort of Pong variant, but one's top bottom, one's side to side, and luckily the corners are like hard edges, so the ball doesn't get like right in the middle of the corner and nobody can hit it or something. So yeah, it definitely reminded me of Elimination a lot, which is just a 4-player version of the same game almost. So there's not too much new to talk about really. I give the gameplay the same rating, which is a 4.5 out of 5 as I did Elimination. It's still a great game. And one of my favorite parts about this game and Elimination is each edge of the screen would have its own like score being kept, which is more like a number of lives. So if the ball would go down the bottom of the screen and go off the screen, that bottom paddle would lose a life. So even in a 2-player mode, you could have your bottom paddle be eliminated before your top paddle, and then you just have the top paddle. Yeah. And then
so it does create situations where it's kind of one paddle against 2 paddles if you're playing 2-player.
Yes. Which is very cool. And whenever a paddle goes out, that the whole edge of the screen becomes a solid wall. So the ball will just bounce off of it, which is really nice. And it does that all like basically in real time. So yeah, I quite like it. I still think, just like Elimination, it's one of the best competitive Pong games out there, in my opinion. I just love how the game, it can feel like things are left unsettled until the very end, like anything can happen.
Right.
Especially in this version, because you could be like the left and right sides, and the ball would come in, horizontally, hit your left paddle, and you would just hit it into the right paddle or like into your own goal. That happened pretty often. So
I could definitely see that.
Yeah, there's definitely situations where things could really spiral, but I think that's kind of pretty fun about it. Whereas, in like the original Pong, I feel like if one person is really good at Pong, they're always going to win that. But with the added like obstacle in the middle of the screen and the added complexity of always trying to hit it in a direction that's not exactly where the ball came from, I think this version is one of the best out there. So I gave it a high gameplay, like I did Elimination. For graphics, I gave it the same, just 1.5 out of 10. Basically, it's just like Elimination, but you've got that obstacle in the middle. And I don't think the obstacle really adds much to the visual appeal of it, so I just kept it the same. For sound, you have your common Pong, bleeps and bloops, which maybe we'll play an audio example of, but it's nothing new, nothing we haven't heard before, so I just gave it a 1 out of 10. And finally, for relevance, I gave it a 5 out of 10. I don't think it's as relevant as Elimination. I mean, obviously, this is heavily based off of Elimination, but I like that, the direction they took with it and how they evolved the concept. They didn't change much, but in my opinion, they made a 4-player game playable with 2 people, and since the game is so fun, I enjoyed experiencing that. So yeah, and I've never played Pong where I'm like the top and the bottom and not anywhere on the sides. So
right, yeah, that's weird. It kind of messes with your head.
Yeah, it's a good game. It wasn't my first choice, which I'll talk about here in a sec, but I'm glad I got to play it. It's always like a fun one you can always go back to. So overall, I gave it a 3 out of 10. Pretty good, pretty solid.
Nice, seems fair. I was wondering when you were talking about the different lives and the situation where one paddle got eliminated for one player before the other. Do you think that actually gives the single paddle sort of an advantage because they now have 2 scores they can zone in, or 2 zones they can score in? Jeez, I don't know how my brain messed that up.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. And I think the fact that, the paddle that's gone is now a hard edge, like the chance of that ball hitting that hard edge and going towards your opponent on the sides, I think is a lot higher than it going straight back and into your own goal. So
right, yeah, you're probably more likely to self score.
Yeah, like let's say you're on the top, right, and you just kind of hit the ball down some like towards the bottom of the screen. As long as it's not completely vertical, when it hits, it's going to go towards your opponent. So that means you can hit it to the left towards your opponent's goal, the right, and to the bottom, and it'll probably get to your opponent too. So I definitely think having like losing a paddle might be beneficial. But obviously you want to keep as many lives as you can because you will lose some.
And at some point you're just going to be sort of tied up again, except now each person only has one paddle.
And that can be really interesting too, because it'll be like just the top and the right side, for instance.
Right, you're always kind of on corners from each other.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. So it's a very interesting game, and it makes it different every time a little bit. So
nice.
And the game, I don't know if I mentioned, but Wipeout also has the 4-player elimination. At that point it's basically a clone, but to have one machine that can do both, even better.
Right, definitely an improvement.
Yeah. So moving on from Wipeout, we're going back into computer games. This next one is called Super Star Trek. And yes, we are back to Star Trek. We can't get away. There's basically one every year. Yeah.
Yeah.
This one's interesting because the very first Star Trek game I reviewed was Star Trek 72 or 71. And this is the sequel. So I believe Super Star Trek was made by somebody different, but the original Star Trek 72 author basically said this is an official version, because he took the old 72 one and just upgraded it. So this one has a little bit more complex gameplay, improvements to AI, UI, basically just an overhauling of the original 1972 version of the game. So I really enjoyed the 1972 version. I'm sure I would have enjoyed this version, but I thought, it didn't really change that much, so I didn't think it was necessary to re-review completely, but
right.
It's cool to see that game is still, living on even in early 1974. And then after Super Star Trek, we have a game called, is it called Wander?
Wander, probably.
But it's spelled with an A.
Yeah, that's how you spell Wander.
Is it? With an O? Wait a minute.
That's Wonder.
Oh my god. How do we English? Okay, Wander. I knew that.
You knew that, Ben.
Yeah.
It was all for the bit.
How would you spell Wander? Wouldn't it be spelled the same?
Yeah, but I don't think that's a word.
Okay, Wander. This game I really wanted to play. This was like the one I was going to do instead of Wipeout, but I just could not get a file that worked for me. But this is another text-based adventure computer game. And what made Wander so good is it was more than just a game itself. It was kind of like a level editor at the same time, or even a complete like game maker, similar to like RPG Maker you would find today or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
It had like a type of structure, and you could just write in your own stories and then have other people play them. So it looked really, really interesting to me. It's a true like text-based adventure game where you're like at a doorway and it's like, what do you do? It's one of those ones.
Yeah.
The amount of things that you could do wasn't that much. It was like, I think one was like take, and it would be like, you take a flower from the ground. And that's probably not useful at all in the rest of the story. But, there was like observe, there's a couple things you could do, and the stories weren't very long. It was just like, if you're thinking, comparing to this like a D&D game, it might be like 3 or 4 rooms or something. But it's basically like a D&D game where you can do almost anything that you can think of to a certain extent. So this game, I think, really it kind of is the first of its kind when it comes to those text-based adventure games. And I really, really wanted to play it, but I'm not a computer engineer.
Right.
And the only thing out there, which is published for free by the original creator, Peter Langston, is like C++ code, and I cannot figure it out. So if any one of you want to try it, give it a go. You can make your own game in it. So definitely look into it. I don't think there's another game like it that comes out in 1974. In 75, I think I think in 75 the actual D&D game comes out, so that'll be the next closest thing. But
yeah, and when I used to think text game, that's the kind of game that I thought of. So I'm sure we'll encounter more on the timeline that we can hopefully get a chance to really dig into.
Yeah, but I feel like this is like one of the biggest honorable mentions possible, but because I do think it really, kind of changed the game when it came to those text-based adventure games. So, and it wasn't space-based, which was cool.
Yeah, nice to get some fantasy in there instead of all the Star Trek, although I do love space and Star Trek.
Yeah, I think the original story that it shipped with was named Castle. So, yeah.
Okay, nice. Sure, right up that fantasy alley.
Yeah, I want to say there wasn't combat, but I could be wrong about that. I think it was more just, opening doors and trying to talk to people and stuff.
Right, sort of like an exploration and questing kind of thing.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I didn't get to play it, so. But now we heard more about Wipeout, which is a great game, so.
Perfect.
Yeah, so why don't we move on to the next one, which I think, again, is a pretty big one. You want to talk to us about Basketball, Wes?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the second game I got to play. It's Basketball by Taito, which I did want to quick small note. We had been saying this company Taisho, but I'm pretty sure it's Taito. It's a Japanese company, and there's different Americanized pronunciations of it. For the rest of this, that's what we're going to go with, though.
Taito.
Taito, yes, yeah. Watch next episode, it'll come up and I'll say it differently. But for this episode, at least, that's how I'm going to say it.
Sounds good.
And this one came out in 1974, early in the year. And the huge importance that Ben was hitting at for this one is this is the first game with human sprites that we have show up in the timeline.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And as we know, just for me, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is original Mortal Kombat games. But sprites are going to be a huge thing. And I don't want to say all games, but I'm pretty sure it's got to be a majority for a lot of the years once people realize that, hey, this is a good way to visually represent something on the screen.
Yeah, I think basically until the 3D era, it was all sprites.
Right, yeah. And so I did do a little research. As we mentioned before, I'm not super technically intelligent. That's a harsh way to frame it on myself, but I don't exactly know how the coding and representation of games works and all that, but I looked up a little bit because I didn't really know what makes a sprite a sprite. And the basic thing is that sprites are a 2D representation of something, and it's stored separately in the game's memory than the background image, but it's still shown on that background image. And this was important because before, whenever motion or animation was being shown in a game, it had to refresh the whole screen, including the background and whatever image was on it.
Okay.
But now it only has to refresh, which I think is the right word. Again, I'm not super sure on the technical terms for it, but it only really has to refresh the height of that sprite to be able to simulate movement. And you can have a static background that isn't constantly buffering and refreshing. And I would assume, although it's hard to tell with emulators, that this means it would be a lot faster and you could do a lot more with the animation than you normally could.
Yeah, I'm sure it allowed creators to make more complex games, because they could push the hardware a little bit more. It feels like one of those, at the end of the PS2 era's life when they're doing everything they can to get the last drops of performance out, It's
right. Able to do more with the memory of these systems, and as the systems improve, then you're able to find inventive ways to make the games do more with what they already had.
Yeah.
And this one was released in the US as a TV Basketball by Midway, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And it's a sideways view of a basketball court where each player controls two different characters. One is by their net, and then the other is by the opponent's net. And basically they just you control them jumping straight up and down. They can't move horizontally across the screen. And it's Pong-ish in that there's a ball bouncing around the screen and you have to hit it into the opponent's net. It's nice that it's sort of like hockey in the sense where there's a limited goal and it's not just the whole side of the screen. You actually have to hit it up and it actually has to go down into the net. It's not like you could just hit it sideways into the net, get a point. So it's cool to see sort of an accurate-ish representation of basketball in that way. The score's displayed on the screen, which I love, as we mentioned.
Yep.
And that goes up by 2 points for each score that you get, which you're more familiar with basketball than I am, but I think that's pretty accurate to how it's actually played.
Yep.
And it seems to also bounce at varying angles and speeds based on where the sprite hits it and whether or not the sprite is hitting the ball, when it's moving up or when it's going down. So I thought it was a lot of interesting elements that kind of took the Pong clone idea and made it basketball, and that gave it its own unique identity. And for the graphics, I gave it a 2 out of 10. The court's really simple, but of course it has sprites, which don't look exactly like people, but you can definitely tell they're people. And there's a ball moving across the screen, which for a lot of the stuff that we've seen before is pretty impressive, or it's good for a time and much better than what we've been seeing so far.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was more than just black and white, right?
I think it had. See, I'm not sure for the original. The version I played was just black and white, although the background might have been a different color.
Yeah, I feel like, wasn't the background like green?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's just if it was green, like displayed green, or if that's just how the type of display they used showed it.
Right.
So I'm not too sure. It could have just been like, how CRTs or whatever they were using had like sort of a greenish hue to them anyway, but so I'm not too positive on that. But either way, I mean, it's pretty good graphics for it, but still simple overall. So 2 out of 10 is what I decided on for that.
Also, I have to ask you, how detailed are the human sprites? Because, did they have arms?
They did, yeah.
Ooh.
They're just kind of like these little diagonal, imagine like Minecraft when you do like a diagonal line where it's just like square over here, then a square right next to it, and then going up so it looks like their arms are just almost up in the air.
Okay. Cool.
But I mean, it's like, it's very pixely, but you're like, oh yeah, that's a basketball player.
Yeah, you can tell.
It's not just a square jumping up and down where there's a overlay of a basketball player over it.
Did it have a face?
No, it didn't. It was just solid. They might have had hair. I couldn't really tell.
Oh wow. Maybe
I mean, if it was just like one pixel in the center of his head. So
still.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think we've not seen a human yet in our whole history, I believe.
No, I mean, it's just the overlays, which doesn't really count as graphics, really, that the Odyssey did.
No moving humans then.
No, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this is a pretty big step in that. So maybe I could even go a little higher on there, but in the context of modern games, you're definitely looking at that I mean, I know it's a guy or a girl, but that's about all I can really tell.
Right. No, I'm not saying. I'm just, want people to imagine it in their minds,
Yeah, get the full image of what this actually looked like in the context of our timeline. And so for sound, it just had the typical Pong-ish sounds, the bleeps and bloops and bounces whenever the ball hit off a player or a wall. And also it did have, I think, sort of like a similar buzzing kind of sound when it went through the basket. So I gave that a 1 out of 10. So let's take a look and listen to one of those sounds right now. Yeah, so there's our example of that sound. And for gameplay, I gave it a 3 out of 10. It's a little hard to get the ball into the basket, but not impossible. The way that the angles that it's bouncing at, it's a little weird for it to always have to bounce down into the basket. But I think it's a nice challenge, not a challenge that would push you away from playing the game. And it also is cool that the way your players are positioned, you can actually do sort of offensive and defensive moves. You're moving them both at the same time, but they both have different purposes for either blocking your opponent's shot or hitting it back into their basket. And even though it's not realistic, I kind of liked that even when you score it in the basket, the game just keeps going. It doesn't reset the ball in the middle.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I don't want to lay too heavily on that in case that's something in the version I played and not how it was in the original. But I kind of like that from just keeping the game going and keeping you involved in it.
Yeah.
And then for relevance, of course, this one's going to rate highly. So I gave it a 7 out of 10. It had the first human sprites, which is huge. It allows for a pretty big jump in the speed of play. as far as like how fast the visual representations are moving and everything, and also the quality of an arcade game. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, sprites are going to be used in tons of stuff until we get into the prevalence of 3D games. So it's hugely important. And actually, I'm looking at that 7 thinking, I could bump it a bit higher, but I'll stick with that for now.
Yeah. And in terms of like games that have made leaps in video gaming history, I think this is like one of the first ones that's not by Atari. I could be wrong, but other than Magnavox and Atari.
Yeah, definitely. When we're talking like arcade games too, Taito's getting in there and actually making a big jump that before Atari could beat them to it.
Yeah, so I feel like it's another like indication that some of these other companies are starting to do things on their own and make their own experiments and take their own risks. So
right, which is of course going to help the industry grow when it's actually some competition for Atari and everyone's trying to be better than the other person.
Yeah, for sure.
And so overall, of those things taken into account, I gave basketball a 4 out of 10, which is pretty high for some of the stuff we've rated so far.
Yeah.
I think it's a fairly fun game on its own, even if you're not keeping in mind the fact that it had the first human sprites, but then that definitely bumps it up even more. It has that Pong-ish gameplay, but adding the basketball goals and the court in the background and the 2 different players that you're controlling at the same time really puts its own unique spin on it to kind of define it as its own game.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of like a Pong clone that's more than just a Pong clone. You know, it is different.
Right.
It is its own thing. So I think they knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, it's really starting to get more elements that aren't Pong than those that are. So it's like not just a clone.
Yeah, I should mention in 1974, there's still a lot of Pong clones, but I read that Pong clones at this time are going to start decreasing in popularity. Like the peak is gone now. So I know it only lasted a whole year, but we're still going to see them, but they're going to hopefully start diverging into different genres and stuff. So
cool.
Kind of like our next game, which is I'm doing called Rebound by Atari. Atari, we're going to talk about them quite a lot today, but this is the first one. This came out in February of 1974, and this is the volleyball game I always wanted, Wes.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, if you remember our second Magnavox Odyssey episode 5, I played volleyball on the Magnavox, and the whole time I was just like, this could have been so much better.
Right, yeah.
And this game is that game that I wanted back then. So
nice.
It's basically like each person has a paddle, and they're on the bottom of the screen. One person's on the left, one's on the right, and there's a net in the middle, and you cannot go vertically. So it's just side to side. You'll have your, usual Pong ball that will fall, and you're trying to hit it up over the net into your opponent's side. So that's what I wanted the original volleyball to be, and I'm so glad we've got it now. I wish it had an overlay, I'll say that, because it's just black and white, basically 3 lines and a dot. But,
okay, the net's sideways, so it's just basically a pole.
Yeah,
okay.
Basically just a pole. I will say it's nice that the ball has physics, whereas the Magnavox, you would have to use the English, right? So yeah, it's nice. The ball, it hits off the paddles in a way similar to like these Pong clones, where it can be fast, it can be slower, you can aim it if you hit it off the side of your paddle. So that kind of really makes it nice. Something I found out really fast was if you hit it like behind yourself and it goes off the edge of the screen, you'll lose a point. So
yikes.
that actually happened pretty often, because I would hit the ball, and if it goes to the wrong direction, it'll probably just go off the screen. So it's a hard game for sure. I think a lot harder than Pong and elimination and wipeout and stuff like that.
Right, a lot more ways that you can lose points. Yeah,
hit into the net, no good. If you miss it, it falls below you, you lose a point. If it goes behind you, you lose a point. So it really feels like a very challenging game. and the paddles aren't very big, which was something that made it really hard. So, I mean, I'm glad that this happened because I feel like this is the accurate representation of volleyball for once.
Right.
You're not like halfway above the screen, but at the same time, it feels like half the screen is complete darkness and there's nothing there.
Right.
So, you know, it's interesting. Interested that Atari made it. I don't know. I don't know if the old volleyball game influenced this one at all. It seems almost strange that Atari would make a volleyball before like a basketball or football or something like that. But I don't know. Maybe it was really popular at the time. But they made it. I'm glad they did. And let me get into my ratings. So I probably didn't rate this as high as if you had heard me in the last episode. But I give the gameplay 2.5 out of 10. It's interesting. It's different. It's completely unique compared to any other Pong clone out there. So, I enjoyed that. It was something different, a breath of fresh air. So I give it 2.5 out of 10. For graphics, I gave it a 1.5 out of 10. It was fine for what it was, but there's nothing particularly interesting going on. For sound, you've got the common bleeps and bloops. It's basically the same sounds as like a Wipeout or Pong, so I don't think there's a need to play them. And for relevance, I gave it a 5 out of 10. I think it's like the first accurate representation of volleyball, makes it kind of interesting to me, but I don't think it really influenced that much further down the line. Maybe it did. We're going to see some other games where you just have one or two paddles just at the bottom of the screen and you're hitting things like up towards the top of the screen. So maybe that influenced a couple things, but for this type of game mode itself, I didn't see many other games that copied this or cloned it. So yeah.
Right. And even now there aren't, when you think of sport games, that's not really one that's prevalent or that a lot of people are making.
Yeah, I think it was probably because of the technology at the time. It was like volleyball games in general were a lot more popular back in the 8-bit or 16-bit era. But considering this doesn't have I feel like if this had the human sprites that basketball had, it would have been like pretty cool.
Yeah,
like even if they could jump up a little bit, but since it's just a straight horizontal line right at the bottom of the screen, it kind of takes away a little bit of the enjoyment, I think. So yeah, I liked it. It is the volleyball game I asked for, but it was one of those where I started playing it and I was like, maybe this is why I'm not a game developer.
There's only so much you can do, yeah.
And I feel like if they had made it a little bit easier too, it would have helped make it a lot more fun. But, I understand it's an arcade machine. They're probably hoping you lose all your lives and put in another quarter. So
very true.
Overall, I gave Rebound a 2.5 out of 10. And this whole kind of volleyball concept will continue with the next game, sort of as a game. Basically, Rebound is it's very similar to the original Pong in terms of its wiring and electronics. So Atari actually published a conversion kit that let owners of Pong machines switch the game to play Rebound. They only had to unplug a couple things, plugged in a new card or something here and something there. They put a new name above the case, and now it's Volleyball by Atari. So that came out sometime in 1974. I'm not sure when exactly, but Rebound came out in February of 74. So I think that's the first Atari game of the year. So pretty cool.
We'll have to see what they come out with next.
Oh yeah, I don't think we'll have to wait that long.
And so next up, moving on to some of the honorable mentions that we had after that. These were all Pong clones that we had very little info on, but we know they did come out in 74. First, there was Tennis Co-op 2 by Bally, Astro Hockey by HID/Visco Games, and Pong and Hockey by Electromotion Incorporated.
I wonder if that's really Tennis Co-op. I've been calling it by myself Tennis Scoop.
I was thinking that too. And then I was like, co-op makes sense in my head.
Co-op
but I actually don't know if it's multiplayer or...
Now I'm thinking that I don't know how to read. I think that's what this podcast is telling me. So after those Pong clones. We've got another Atari game in February again. They're just
there you go.
killing it in February. So this one's called Super Pong. Obviously, way better than Pong, right? Wrong. Wrong. It's just Pong, but you've got 3 paddles, so kind of similar to like hockey by Ramtech.
Right.
But interestingly, the orientation of the paddles is different. So hockey by Ramtech, it was like you had 1 in the back and 2 in the front of this game screen. But this one, it's like you've got 3 paddles and they're all on your half of the game screen. And they're all in the same like horizontal row. So it's kind of like they're standing in line beside each other with a little bit of space in between, which seems kind of strange. And I don't know if it would be super easy to use. So
my response to that is, but why?
Yeah. I feel like if it hit the middle one, it's probably going to go and hit the one in front of it that's standing like right in front of it and then hit back into your own goal. So it seems like a weird one, but they, Atari's like, this is the next big thing. So
there you go.
It wasn't though. It kind of, nobody played that game.
And then after that, we have Spike by Key Games, which released in March of 74. And again, Key Games is basically like other Atari owned by Atari.
Yep.
And this one is a clone of Rebound, but it had a spiker paddle that spikes the ball if it is hit just barely above the net. So doing their trademark thing of making a slightly different game, publishing it under another company so that they can sell more games.
Yep.
And after that, for our final honorable mention of the episode, we have Quadra-Pong, which is different than Super Pong, by Atari, which also came out of March in 74. And this one is going the reverse direction. It's a clone of Elimination by Key Games.
Yep. So Atari playing those 2 markets.
Reading this back, I'm thinking, how was this even legal at the time?
It's not. Well, it's not that it was illegal. It was that Atari was in a contract, like saying, like, we're not going to do this. So right. I guess it's illegal in terms of contract law, but not against the like general law, I guess.
Right.
So yeah, kind of cool.
And with that, I think we're pretty much done for the episode, right?
Yeah. So we covered 13 games today, including the first game with human sprites, basketball.
Heck yeah.
Which we're calling by Taito?
Taito, yeah. Okay. Taito. Either way, it's...
we should probably say Taito, because otherwise it sounds like the second half of potato. Taito.
Weird that your brain goes to that first, but okay, I'll remember that.
I've got potatoes on the mind, Wes. Or maybe that is my mind. And then I've been playing too much Mario, obviously.
It's frying your brain.
Yeah. We also checked out the volleyball game I always wanted in Rebound, and Wipeout, another variant of Elimination, and Star Trader. And I wish we would have covered Wander, but I just couldn't get it to run. So if any of you are computer engineers out there, please make me like a launcher or something. Just like the game doesn't have an executable. Like, what am I supposed to do? That's what we did today. Please check out our website, our email, send us questions, our Twitter. What else do we have, Wes? Anything else? I think that's it.
I think that's it. I think you hit all of them.
Did I say? I said website. Okay. Yeah. We should go before I say something else stupid.
All right. Well, with that, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all in the next one.
See you in the next one.